Who wouldn't want to hear from a leader who's been surrounded by more than 200 CEOs of $1 million plus businesses? Today, it's an authentic interview with the Executive Director for the Virginia Council of CEOs, Scot McRoberts. It's time to be an authentic leader. What makes this a great interview is that Scot McRoberts was actually very reluctant to even do the interview. He's a humble leader, and it's always about everyone else. It's never about him. So he really didn't think that people would be interested in hearing about him. We ended up having one of the largest crowds we've had to date for the authentic interview. What you'll hear are stories from Scot that is very transparent, especially in the early years of starting the council. Now, I will let you know, you will hear some clanking in the background as you watch the video. We have a very large crowd, and they're all actually enjoying lunch at the time. So some of that clanking are the people who were there in attendance to see this, but also enjoying a great lunch. So I'm going to share with you just a few of the topics that were covered during the interview. You're going to see the full interview. But one of the things I asked Scot was exactly what the Virginia Council of CEOs is all about. And then he also explains exactly the makeup of the peer roundtables and how those are structured. How the Virginia Council of CEOs has helped members to grow their business. He actually brings national speakers to come in and speak to the CEOs who are members of the council and ask who he's been most impressed with of all of those national speakers he's brought in. What would his advice be for a new entrepreneur? And I asked about the benefits that Scot has gained from being an introvert. Make sure you come back at the end of the video where I'll share with you some of my key takeaways from the interview itself. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we get started?
Yeah, so it took me a little while to accept Chris's invitation to do this, and I just share with my friends at the table, I'm an introverted guy, and I think I've used that to my advantage and as a strength, because in my work in not-for-profits and associations, my job is really to put other people in front. So me being in front is not my favorite thing in the world, or perhaps not the thing I'm best at, but I'm really happy to be here because Chris asked great questions.
Oh, great. Well, we're about to find out if I do or not. Yeah. All right. So before the Virginia Council CEOs, you were actually part of the Richmond Chamber, right? And actually on the staff there, is that right?
Right.
Can you tell us maybe a little bit about that?
Sure. I was there for 8 years in the 90s, a long time ago, and had a variety of roles, but at the end I was leading the department that produced small business workshops, major events, trade shows. We brought the Small Business Development Center under the wing of the Chamber at that point. So everything that's sort of programmatically serving small business, which was a great segue to where we are now.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how sometimes in your career you don't really quite understand exactly why you're there, and I'm sure you implement things you learned at that time even today, and it's grown to what you're able to do today.
Yep.
So how did you come about actually leading the Virginia Council of CEOs?
So Chuck McCabe, I don't know, y'all may know Chuck McCabe, People's Tax, has been growing a business here in town for a long time. In late 99, 2000, came into my office at the Chamber and said, hey Scot, I'm going to this CEO roundtable peer group thing. Greatest thing I've ever done for my business. I'm learning a lot. I had this consultant I don't need anymore. Not Chris. And we need to start one in Richmond because this one is in Northern Virginia, and it's a long way away. So we looked at it, and Chuck was participating in a chapter of a small national organization that did peer roundtables for CEOs, and we started a chapter right there out of the Chamber. And within a few months, it was had legs, was ready to go. And I was ready to move on to something new, and I left with it. And we took it back to my extra bedroom and ran it out of there for a few years.
So you must have been a genius, 17 years ago. You knew this was going to be wildly successful from the very beginning, right? And you knew that 17 years later you'd have 200 other members that were part of this, right?
No. A big motivator was that in the chamber business, early morning meetings, night meetings. We had a 1-year-old at home who I most often left before he woke up, most often got home after he was in bed, and I wasn't happy with that. So I took a pretty big pay cut to really be an entrepreneur. It's very much an entrepreneurial leap to start something new. And in fact, we had an advisory board meeting last week, which includes all of our past chairs. And Gail Johnson, Rainbow Station, who was our chair a decade or so ago, was recounting that in probably a year into the formation, we were at a board meeting, and she said, "Do you remember this? We asked you to leave because we were discussing whether or not this was going to make it and how to break it to you."
Oh, wow.
And they decided we would give it a little more time, and we survived.
Wow, that is a hard thing. I'm sure that any business owner in here knows that you get to this point, like, should I pull out of here and leave town, or am I just at the verge of this thing really grabbing some momentum? So, well, good for them and you that they made that decision.
Yep.
So tell us just a little bit about the Virginia Council of CEOs, maybe what people may not know about. What is it exactly?
Sure. So we're a 501c6 not-for-profit association, which is like a chamber or a trade association. And so we're mission-driven, and the mission is to connect CEOs so they can learn from each other. So we're not, we don't do advocacy, political stuff. We don't have a lot of benefit programs or sell insurance. We don't do professional certification, lots of things that associations do. Very narrowly focused on let's connect CEOs so they can learn from and with each other. And then the primary way we do that is through peer roundtables. And a peer roundtable, I don't know if you want me to get into that, 10 non-competing CEOs who agree to meet regularly, usually monthly. It's about a 4-hour meeting, and highly structured, highly disciplined activity in that meeting, but it's self-led by those 10 CEOs. I'm not there. There's no outside facilitator. And the work they do there is pretty much the same month in, month out, but it's let's update each other on what's important that's going on in our life as CEOs. And then let's dive deep into a couple of issues that people have. And that takes, again, a very structured format. Everything's timed so that it doesn't run off the rails. And the really unique part of the process is that in those meetings, no one is allowed to give advice. No one is allowed to say, "Chris, have you tried this?" "Chris, why don't you do it this way?" Instead, what people are asked to do is to share their experiences with each other. And that comes in the format of, "Chris, well, 3 years ago, we went through something sort of like that. Let me tell you the story of what we went through and how we sort of went the wrong way first, and then we went the right way, and how we learned." So that's the power of what we do, is that exchange of experience.
So you mentioned it's monthly, and you mentioned it's also 10 and a round table. So what's magic about monthly and 10?
10 goes back to, Eagle Scout, right?
Oh, yeah.
10 is the number of boys in a patrol. It's the number of, I wasn't in the military, but I understand there's a military, squad is 10, right? Going back to the days of the Romans, 10 is the most functional small group unit number. It's not too small, it's not too big. So we have groups with 8, 9, or 10. That's about the number.
How about monthly? What's the magic about monthly instead of, you could do every week, you could do twice a month,
So commitment is an absolute bedrock value of what we do. And before CEOs join us, I say, just don't join unless you're going to attend every single meeting.
Yeah.
And so that's month in, month out. And for, I think for the members, that monthly commitment is both a beacon and something to look forward to, where they can, I can get away from the fray of the day-to-day and clear my head with some people I trust, and it's on my calendar and I have to go, and I'm going to learn something. I'm going to be better for it, and I think monthly keeps people in touch enough so you can
Yeah.
build that intimacy in those relationships.
Yeah. So I can imagine that some people who might be interested in joining the Virginia Council of CEOs is that, boy, I could join that and get really build these relationships with people on my roundtable, and I could grow my business that way, right? And I can get some business from people in the roundtables. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You'd be sorely disappointed.
Okay, that's blunt, right?
The purpose of participating in Virginia Council of CEOs is not business development. It's really developing the CEO. So, in fact, in a roundtable, the standard, every roundtable has a set of rules that it sort of customizes to its own desires, but the standard rule is you don't do business with anybody in your roundtable. So you don't buy a roof from the guy who sells roofs. You don't buy insurance from the guy who sells insurance. And that prevents the walls that come up when the guy across the table is your customer and you want to talk about raising prices, for example. So no competitors. And then in the broader council, 215 members here in Charlottesville, lots of business happens. But that's because we focus on building relationships first. And one of my members said it best a few years ago. He said, "I don't sell to anybody in the council. I have a lot of council members who buy from me." So
That's good.
That's the culture of the group.
Okay, good. So one more about the roundtables. How do you keep it consistent? Like, for example, like what are the things that are just plain non-negotiable? But I can imagine there's some parts of it that you can make the roundtable your own depending on how the group dynamics are.
It's a human activity, and humans are infinitely variable.
Yeah, right. Good point.
But we put a lot of structure around a roundtable, particularly when we start a new one. And we take 10 total strangers usually, put them in a room for a day with our trainer who comes out of DC and does this all over the world. He's just amazing. So we start them off with that day of training, and for the past few years, we've started inserting an experienced member along with those new people to be their coach for the first few meetings, sort of keep them on the rails. We provide the template and the very disciplined process for that meeting. And then, different groups will sort of tweak it a little bit, but the uniform thing over 17 years has been if you go too far off the process, if you're not holding people accountable for speaking from experience, if you're not holding to regular time frames and following the process, usually the roundtable leader calls and says, "This really isn't working right. What's wrong here?" And well, are you doing this? Are you doing so? It's a proven process. It's not something we invented. There are two international CEO groups, YPO and EO, that do the same process, and so they sort of cultivate the process and iterate it, and they certify trainers, independent trainers, and we hire their trainers.
Oh, great, good. Of course, you've had just wild success. I mean, multiple growth over every year, never have a dip or anything like that, especially in 2008 during the recession. I'm sure that you had no problems whatsoever during that time. Of course, I'm being a little
overnight success, 17
exactly.
years, yeah.
So what happened in 2008 during the recession? I'm sure that had some sort of impact on your organization.
We feel like we had just gotten our legs under us. We'd hit about 75 members or so as the recession hit. And for the first time in our existence, we lost ground. We lost, I think, 5% of membership one year, 6% the next, which most associations were losing 15, 25%. So not bad. But we were small. We didn't have much money in the bank to weather it. So we just cut expenses. And then I guess in the second year of that, our board was saying, okay, where are we going with this? We're in a trough. What are we going to do to manage this? And we decided that we needed to come out of it strong, and we we had $12,000 in the bank, and we took $10,000 and invested in rebranding the organization.
Wow, that's a big risk, I can imagine. At that time, $10,000.
It was. So the logo on the front there, Circle S Studio designed for us. We built a new website, did a video with our members talking about what they got out of it. And so, yeah, it was a big risk, but we came out of the next year, we grew about 28%.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's the risk worth taking.
Yeah, it worked.
I'm glad your crystal ball was working and you knew guaranteed it was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a big leap of faith. So you are now in the hottest place in Richmond, Scott's Addition. So what is it that you like about being in Scott's Addition?
So we were previously over off of on Bayberry Court, Forest and Glenside area, and had a very nice office. And I never knew or saw anybody else besides the people in my office. So I would walk down to JJ's office and see him.
Yeah.
But in Scott's Addition, there are always people on the street. There are restaurants and a brewery or two.
A couple.
Where I like to take meetings.
Yeah.
And always running into people I know and people I want to know. Yeah. And it's just the vibe is very entrepreneurial and exciting.
Good. You and I met at a brewery recently.
Yeah.
I think you actually owe me some beers, right?
I do.
Okay. So you guys all heard that, right? Okay. Well, you talk about that. I'd be interested because there is so much activity happening in Scott's Addition. You actually do some like shared space, right? Who have you met just as a result of having that kind of arrangement set up that maybe you wouldn't have met otherwise?
Michael Perrone from Impact Makers,
Oh, yeah.
who I knew of, but I didn't know. You know, I was at Urban Farmhouse, and we've had a few conversations there. Some of the guys that own the breweries, the guys that run Vazen, I've met and talked to and built relationships with, just because I'm over there every once in a while.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. I mean, this is a relationship town, right?
Yeah.
And it's that face-to-face interaction. I mean, the success I've had is only because I see people in person, right?
Absolutely.
You just can't do that otherwise.
Absolutely.
So, wow, terrific. Okay. So I've seen some recent posts about Virginia Council CEO members, specifically the RVA 25 and the Inc. 5000 list. So, I mean, I'm sure you would like to be able to say it's all because they've been in the council, but can you tell us maybe a little about how that might be an ingredient that has led to their success?
I think it had, Jim Fitzgerald from Terradale is over there. He's been on the Inc. list, 10 times in a row, Jim? Wow. Pretty unprecedented. Not many people do that. And, it's certainly not because of Virginia Council of CEOs. It's because Jim's an outstanding entrepreneur. But I think we might have helped a little along the way.
It's no coincidence that I joined the council 10 years ago.
There you go.
Thanks, Jim.
There's an endorsement right there. You didn't pay him for that or anything.
No. But I don't know if this is not the question you asked, but probably right out of the recession when we had a new website, a new platform to go to market, I thought, and I think I'm right, what we have to market with and sell is our members and their success.
Yeah.
And so we try to push them out front, show them off as much as we can.
Good. Another thing that you do that I think is kind of unique, you have the quarterly economic survey results that you do. It's in partnership with University of Richmond, I believe, right?
Right.
What value do you think that is providing to the Richmond business community, even really for non-members of the council too, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of economic indicators and surveys out there, and they're usually the big businesses. Ours focuses on our audience, and our audience is, $1 to $20 million businesses. The broad base of the pyramid, and the survey is something I saw that the Business Roundtable does. Business Roundtable is the biggest companies in America, so we're sort of almost the smallest. But it asks 3 questions. Are you next 6 months? Are you going to grow revenue? Are you going to invest in capital spending? And are you going to increase employment? Increase, the same, or decrease? And rolls that together in an index. So I think it's really helpful to our local small business community to have an index that is really about them and shows them what's happening in their world and not at GE or somewhere else.
Good. Okay. Great. Thanks. Now, with the Virginia Council CEOs, you are many times bringing in business leaders, and really business leaders, what I call celebrities. I mean, I've seen some of the names that you've brought in. Who have you been most impressed with that you've brought in?
Wow, good question. Maybe not most impressed. We've had some speakers who are just phenomenal presenters, and blow you off the stage. But the one I can think of who's had the most impact is Bo Burlingham. And Bo was a editor at large at Inc. magazine for years. He's at Fortune now. But Bo wrote a book about 10 years ago called Small Giants. And Bo, as a journalist who focused on business, recognized these little companies that were remarkable. And he went to study them, and then he profiled them in his book, and he identified this sort of category of small business called small giants. And the CEO or the owner made a specific decision about their business, and that is, I don't have to grow. I need to, I want to focus on my lifestyle, being very profitable, serving my community in a certain way, being a great place to work for people in this community, or some other reason other than just growth. And he identified characteristics around those companies. But he spoke at our conference about 7 or 8 years ago, and I saw the light bulbs go off over my members' heads, and they're like, "You mean I don't have to just grow and grow and grow?" And there are other things I can do to be successful and become a small giant, and not just grow a business that for growth's sake.
Good. Yeah, a light bulb moment, literally, right? For people to think differently.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. How do you define success for the Virginia Council CEOs? And really, what does success look like? How do you know you're successful?
I know success when I get a phone call from a member or an email, and they describe how their involvement in the council has changed their life. And I had one about a year or two ago, a guy who's in a family business. His dad was like holding on to stuff and wouldn't really participate in the transition that was obviously needed to be made, and had a strained relationship with his dad, but he was clearly the future of the company. And he was, in fact, the president and CEO, but his dad was sort of holding on to the purse strings and everything else. And he said, 2 years in my roundtable, they helped me work through that and find ways to move that situation. And now I have a great relationship with my dad. The business is growing.
Wow.
But in a broader sense, we look at a lot of metrics. Attendance at roundtables, 94% every month.
Wow.
Retention is around 90% every year. I think if those numbers went down significantly, I would feel worried about if we were doing the right stuff.
Yeah, that's probably a good barometer to at least know that if you're engaging people enough and they want to stay engaged. Okay. How about like your struggles? Like, what is it that you struggle with most, and maybe kind of keeps you awake at night?
There's a lot of competitors out there, both for-profit and not-for-profit. And on one hand, I feel like we're not serving nearly all the small business CEOs that we need to, and maybe we can't. So maybe it takes some other organizations that are a little different to reach more folks, because I firmly believe every small business CEO ought to be in a peer roundtable of some sort.
Yeah.
But I worry about that. We keep raising the bar on programming. So beyond the roundtables, we do an annual retreat with folks like Bo Burlingham and national level speakers. And then we do some quarterly luncheons with speakers here in Richmond, some workshops. And as we keep raising the bar on that program, it gets harder and harder to meet expectations around that stuff.
Yeah. What happens when you bring former presidents in or something, right?
Yeah. I mean, crazy stuff.
Exactly. Well, I can certainly understand that. So what's next for the Virginia Council CEOs? Like, say in the next 5 years or so, where do you see the Virginia Council CEOs?
We are, this year started building roundtables in Charlottesville and are looking at what other geography we can expand to. The rest of Virginia, not Northern Virginia, is underserved by what we do. So I think the door's wide open. Beyond that, I think society and the business culture and people's lives have changed so dramatically in the way we live and operate in the past decade or so that our model for this roundtable meeting, it takes 4 hours once a month, may not be as approachable or doable or fit with the way people work. So we just really started in our leadership meetings talking about how we can think about new models for that, new ways to achieve the same result without the same obligation. So that worries me a little bit. We need to stay relevant, and we need to stay adapt to the way people want to work and connect.
Yeah, I imagine that is a hard decision. It's one of those things like you let that the can of worms open, and now it's hard to get them back in afterwards. So. So you mentioned Charlottesville. Why Charlottesville? What made you decide to move to Charlottesville next?
The board decided last year to sort of live into our name, Virginia Council of CEOs, and certainly not be the Richmond Council of CEOs. And Charlottesville is easy to reach, sort of relates to Richmond, so we decided to go there first. We thought it would be easiest. It's not easiest.
Is that right?
Charlottesville is a great community, and it's a very tight community, and it's taken a little time to get people to say, oh, that guy from Richmond really is trustworthy or has something of value, and we've recruited a bunch of great people, and we're this close to starting a couple of roundtables, so we'll be there soon.
So what have you learned through that experience? I mean, I know when you went into it, it ends up being a little bit different than what you originally thought. Which, how many times does something you do in your business, it ends up being exactly what you planned it to be, right?
We should have done what we're doing now, which is we should have found and identified local partners to go to market with. Instead, we had a handful of members there, and we thought we could just go and wow them with our success and who we are, and they weren't that impressed.
Well, I can imagine why you would, though, because it has been tremendous success here. I mean, it's hard to argue with 200 plus CEOs.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, why wouldn't? Good. Well, lesson for all of us there, right? Thanks for sharing that. That's good for all of us.
New markets are hard.
Yeah, good. So can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in the Virginia Society for Association Executives? And you're currently the president, as I mentioned before.
Volunteer role.
Yeah.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that. I imagine a good handful of people here are not necessarily familiar with it.
Sure. We're so Virginia Society of Association Executives is the association for associations.
Let's keep on going.
People like me. Jim Roman's involved. He's on our board as well. For me, 17 years ago, when I left the chamber and all the professional development and colleagues and connections that I had there, and I was alone in my home office all week, I was absolutely crucial. I joined VSAE immediately, and I had programs, I had luncheons once a month, I had places to go and be with colleagues, continue to expand my abilities and my learning. And most of our members in the VSAE are smaller associations like us, and we rely on each other for that. Continued learning, and I have a roundtable of association colleagues that I meet with every month, and we meet tomorrow. And,
is that right?
I always look forward to going there with the puzzling questions or even the big strategic things.
So what have you learned about leadership specifically that you just simply could not have learned otherwise from as a result of you being the executive director?
Wow. You didn't tell me you were going to ask that.
I didn't tell you what I was asking any of these questions, right?
What have I learned about leadership? You know, back in the 90s when I was at the Chamber, I was finishing up a Master of Public Administration degree, and I took a couple of courses in leadership, and you're studying the literature and the books and the key names in leadership, and I learned about servant leadership and where the usual pyramidal sort of top-down leadership and how you flip that and invert it, and the leader is at the bottom, and his or her job is to serve and make everyone else better and help them be better leaders. And I learned that, but I didn't understand it. And this organization grew under that philosophy entirely, because if I had started this, and I probably had the opportunity to take this out of the Chamber and start it as a for-profit enterprise that was just Scot McRoberts, I would not have had the advantage of a committed board of directors, volunteers in every capacity. And that's been the model. It's me there for a while all by myself, but I had a huge pyramid of volunteers and engaged people with me, and my job was to support them and lift them up and make them better. And I think that is in most organizations, that's the preferred way to lead.
Yeah, okay. I agree. I fully support that. Now I know in the roundtables you don't allow people to give advice, but we're gonna take that off for just a moment. If you were to give advice to a new entrepreneur, someone who's just really kind of getting started in their business, what advice might you give them?
I would tell them that the most successful entrepreneurs engage a coach, and have some way to engage peers, and pretty quickly define some sort of operating system for their business. So I think that the three key elements are that, personal coaching, so you got somebody sort of poking around, helping you
accountable,
helping you be better.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Peers, because the peers are going through the same thing you are, and you're going to have different experiences. You can learn from each other in a different way. And then an operating system, whether that's through classes at Robbins School of Business or the variety of operating systems that are out there. Most entrepreneurs I know didn't go to college to be an entrepreneur or a small business CEO.
Right.
And so there's techniques to running a small business that you just have to learn real quick.
Yeah. That's one of the best on-the-job trainings. I mean, as you're an entrepreneur. So you and I, you mentioned this earlier, you and I have at least one thing in common. We're actually both introverts. And people are sometimes surprised to hear me say that. I'm sure they're surprised to hear you sometimes being the leader of this. Have you found that to be, would you describe as an asset or really a detriment, the fact that you're kind of introverted?
Absolutely an asset.
Yeah.
Particularly in that servant leadership model where my job is to put everybody else in front, particularly in association and voluntary organizations like a chamber, and your job is to make everybody else shine. And so, as an introvert, I like getting out of the way.
Yeah, right.
And if they're successful, I feel good about it.
Yeah. I often tell leaders if they're going into it for recognition, you're going into it wrong, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I need to ask you about this. A year and a half ago, you had a major life change, right? You had a heart attack.
Yep.
How did that, really, what changed for you after that?
So very quickly, and I'm sure many of you had the same experience, very quickly small things got much smaller and the big things got bigger. Spending time with my family, maintaining, developing relationships with friends became more important. And then related to work, I became a better delegator almost instantly.
Is that right? Good.
Something I still work on, but it became real clear that the best use of my time, particularly when I was coming back and I was not quite at full capacity. The best use of my time was those big rocks and those things I did best. And I needed to let go of all that other stuff that I sort of like doing and like controlling. But I've got great people. Connie is here who works with me, who can do it probably better than I can.
So that's an important note. Don't have a heart attack to learn that lesson.
Yeah, please.
Right? You can learn that one now. So, of course, I got to ask you this. What does being authentic mean to you?
More and more for me, it means not holding back on sharing my, who I really am and my personal story. And as I've learned from our members and the process we use, the roundtables that are that go there, that become more intimate and more trusting, are more effective and more able to help each other succeed in business. So it's sort of a parallel with me.
Okay, good. So a couple personal things about you. Scot McRoberts with one T. I imagine that may have been fun growing up. Nobody's ever misspelled that, I imagine.
Once or twice.
Once or twice.
Yeah.
Any significance to the one T or?
My mom grew up in Highland Park in Dallas. Highland Park Scots is the team, the football team. So
oh, is that right?
she named me after the football team.
Great.
Yeah.
Did not know that story. Awesome. And so, of course, your mom's from Texas, but you were originally as well. You were.
I was born a Dallas Cowboy fan. Yes.
Okay, great. Dallas Cowboy fans here? Yeah. A couple? Okay.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit of a struggle when you first moved here. What, you were 9 years old, I think?
I was
at the
9.
time?
There were no Cowboys fans in Richmond. Yeah.
So now we got one more at least,
Yeah,
right?
we got one.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And you're a JMU Duke?
Yes, sir.
Graduated from JMU. So any other Dukes in here? Oh, got a couple other Dukes in here. Fantastic. Good.
Longest win streak in Division I football.
Hey,
20 in a row.
There you go. That's a big deal. Yeah. Okay. And you've been married to your lovely wife Teresa for is it 30 years?
It was 30 years this past summer. Yep.
Wow. Congratulations on
Thank you.
that. Yeah. And she's here today.
Yeah,
Is that
she's
right?
right there.
Yeah. Teresa's right over here. Thank you for coming today. That's terrific. Any secrets to being married for 30 years? Just a quick little note. Now you're on the spot.
There's a bunch, but one that I actually shared with a friend the other day was under promise and over deliver.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, my wife just heard that.
I think I'll be home around 7,
Yeah.
but I'm going to be home at 6.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's really good. And you've got 3 adopted children, right? You have 2 sons and a daughter, and I've seen you post some football pictures and got lots going on there.
Yeah. It's football season is fun. I got 2 boys who play varsity football at Godwin, and they're both having really good seasons. And in fact, Sam, my senior, is the, as far as we can tell, the interception leader for the state right now.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's worse things to be known for. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Other teams don't like him so much, I imagine. All right, good. So before we move on to what I call the lightning round, anything that you want to ensure this audience knows about either the Virginia Council CEOs or even about you?
Wow.
Maybe we didn't cover.
Nothing comes to mind, Chris.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
Something may pop up if we
Yeah.
go. Okay, so I think we talked about a book that you recommend and has maybe influenced you a lot. Is it The Small Giants?
Yeah.
I took a note there before. What's the most recent book that you've read?
Goodness gracious. It was a fiction book, and I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry. I've read, and I usually read historical fiction.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
So,
Good.
and then I often go look up what the real history was based on that.
Good. Okay. What's the best advice that you've received from somebody? Or do you ever receive advice since you're not allowed to?
Not much anymore.
Yeah.
My first boss, and I worked for the Boy Scouts of America right out of college. That was my first job. And my first boss was a guy named Harold Tate. Wonderful guy, and he taught me a lot of things, but one related to working with volunteers, which I've been doing the rest of my career, and has served me well, is that even though they're volunteers, people respond to deadlines and expectations.
That's a good one.
And there's no harm in expecting something from a volunteer and setting a deadline and get stuff done.
Good. You know, one thing I say, I've had leaders say, you know, it's different because I work with volunteers. I actually say that even employees, they're volunteers because they can leave at any time, just like a volunteer could leave at any time.
Good
so
point.
you should really treat them the same way.
Yeah.
So, okay, good. What's your coolest bucket list item?
Coolest bucket list. I want to raft the Grand Canyon
Ooh,
with my wife and kids.
wow.
Yeah.
Did you know about that? What did you think? I'd love to know, what were some of the takeaways you had from this video? I'll share with you just a couple that I had. So some of the big takeaways I took away was really the importance of taking a bold move to rebrand. He talked about how they did a very bold move to rebrand during the recession, and really the future was very uncertain at that time, and ultimately ended up growing more than 28% afterwards. Clearly was the right move. Which is just a great message for people who are considering making a bold move themselves, not knowing what the outcome is going to be, and going for it anyway. I need to see Bo Burlingham, the author of Small Giants. He talks about what a great speaker he is, and I just love actually watching great speakers present. I've got to find a way to go see him. Scot's description of success for the Virginia Council of CEOs, I thought it was a really great and a humble definition of what it means to be successful for the council. Also, the lessons learned going into a market with assumptions. So he talks a little bit about the new market that Scott's going into now, and also learn to go back to the roots, the benefits of his new outlook on life after his heart attack. And I mentioned this in the interview, let's not have to go through something like that to make a change in our lives. So think about that now. I think that's, and specifically how he delegates more. Advice for volunteers and how they respond well to being clear about expectations and deadlines. What were your key takeaways? Do you agree with the takeaways that I had? Or did you have another takeaway? Sometimes it wasn't something specifically that you hear during the interview, but when you hear it, it may ring a bell and make you think of something else. So just love to know what were the thoughts spurred from you listening to this video.